Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie. And in this video, I'm going to be looking at the weekend of June the 22nd and 23rd, 2024. So in this video, I want to talk a little bit about American politics with particular emphasis on the Democratic Party. Now, I'm not a great expert on American politics, but I read what people say and I read what people suggest, and there is a view that what's going to happen is that Joe Biden is not going to be on the ballot, that somehow something is just going to happen, with particular reference to Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, that somehow he's just going to appear. Perhaps the Democrats are going to realize that Joe Biden is just not able to function in terms of a second term, and that Kamala Harris is useless, and so they need to do something in order to hold on to power. So this is something we should expect. Now, I'm not saying that that is true or false. I'm just making an observation about what people are saying. Now, I'm, as I said, not a great expert on American politics, but I would guess that there's more scope for Gavin Newsom becoming the Democrat candidate before the Democratic National Convention, which is this year going to be in Chicago, and it starts on August 19th, 2024. At that convention on August 19th, I think it lasts a couple of days, formally, Joe Biden will be chosen as the official Democrat nominee, and Kamala Harris will be chosen as the official vice presidential nominee. And perhaps before the convention, things could happen. But after the convention, that's written in stone. And I'm thinking that after the convention, if Joe Biden were to be incapacitated or something else happens to him, then Kamala Harris would take his place. But I'm not an expert on how these things work. But that's my understanding. But I thought in this video I would have another look at Gavin Newsom. I've looked at his chart a couple of times before, and I thought I'd have another look. I think he is clearly an ambitious man. I don't think we should assume that he will never become US president, but short term, is there any possibility? So that's one thing I want to look at. I also want to look at the chart for the Democratic National Convention. What is happening on August the 19th of this year, because really it's quite dramatic. I don't know why they chose that date. I mean, I've already looked at the Republican convention in July the 15th. That's not great either, because that takes place on a day of Mars-Uranus conjunction. I mean, that's really good timing. Then we've got this convention, which takes place, I think it takes place on the day of the full moon. I mean, that was really sensible, wasn't it? I think that it's a full moon which is square Uranus. Anyway, we'll be looking at that chart very soon. But before I do all of that, I want to look at what's going on this weekend. So here is a chart for the weekend, and as usual, the chart is set for the middle of the weekend. Midnight on Sunday, set for New York, and so there we are, June the 23rd, which is a Sunday, midnight, New York, and there's the moon in Capricorn. Just a reminder that for most, if not all the weekend, the moon is in Capricorn. So with a moon in Capricorn, a lot of us are feeling quite security conscious, and we realize that there are things that need to be attended to. And in the process, we might be a little bit selfish, but when the moon is in Capricorn, we should never feel too guilty about being selfish. Certain things have to be attended to. And, we do have to look after ourselves and our family, and we're perhaps reminded that charity begins at home. Now, the moon does actually move into Aquarius late on Sunday if you are in New York, if you're in the Eastern time zone. So Eastern Standard Time, the moon moves into Aquarius on Sunday, I think at 14 minutes past 11 on Sunday evening. That would be 8:15 in the evening if you're on the West Coast. So strictly speaking, for some of us, the moon does go into Aquarius, right at the end on Sunday evening, and so that could be a bit of a changeover. But I think overall, we have to see it as being a moon in Capricorn weekend. And I would have said that this weekend is dominated by the full moon. I know that the full moon is sort of right at the beginning of a weekend, but there's a full moon sense to what's happening, because you've got the moon in Capricorn, sun in Cancer. Even if that full moon is not exact, we can feel it. And with that full moon, there is this question: do we let go on an emotional level? It's sun in Cancer is about nurturing, allowing our emotions free rein, perhaps. But the moon in Capricorn is saying, well, hold on. You've got to think about yourself. You mustn't be too sentimental. And with this full moon, there can be big changes. People can, on one hand, be very warm and friendly and sentimental and nurturing. And then all of a sudden, they're thinking about themselves. They're suddenly thinking about money and security. It can be very quick. So do be aware of that. Also be aware it's a full moon. Full moons are about seeing the truth of a matter. Nothing is hidden. As I'm speaking to you, it's quite late. I'm looking out of a window and I can see the full disk of the full moon. It's there. I can see it. And the full moon is illuminating. And it's getting into those crevices where the lies are hiding, and it's showing the truth. The lies cannot hide, or they shouldn't hide. Okay, some of us might not want to look at the truth. Even if the truth is staring us in the face, we want to look away. But the truth is available if we do want to find it. And the full moon is also about a transition between a waxing moon, when the moon is getting bigger, and a waning moon, when the cycle is past peak, and sort of a waning moon tends to be unfortunate. All things being equal, though, remember, half the time the moon is waning. So, with a waning moon, if we're doing something on a waning moon, it's a suggestion that we're involved with something that, really is past its best. And so perhaps if you're doing something important, or you're planning something important over the next couple of weeks, maybe you should postpone until the new moon. I'm not saying you should, but it is better to do things on a waxing moon rather than a waning moon. Now, the moon aside, we have a semi-square between Mercury and Uranus. So Mercury and Uranus are about 45 degrees apart. And so with Mercury in Cancer, semi-square, Uranus in Taurus, that can be about realization. Mercury is about the way we think, and Uranus is about surprises. So suddenly something might occur to us, or we might say something just on the spur of a moment, which might get a reaction, not a reaction that we were expecting. Or people might say things and cause absolute chaos through their words. So a bit of mental instability there. And then when I say mental instability, I'm not talking about psychological instability. It's just that our minds can be all over the place, and we might have sudden thoughts which change everything, and we might want to talk about what we're thinking about. And when we start talking about our thoughts, we might get a reaction. And by the same token, we might react to what other people are saying. Overall, I would have said that Saturday is probably a more busy day than Sunday. Saturday sees Moon trine Mars and Moon opposition Mercury. That indicates the desire for action. Moon opposition Mercury, the two communication planets. Moon is about emotional communication. Mercury is about more mental communication. So there's a bit of agitation there. We've got something to say, but how do we say it? Do we let our feelings, do we give our feelings free rein, or do we use our intellect to try to moderate, what we're saying? And then on Sunday, well, the main aspect is Moon trine Uranus. A bit of excitement there. Moon in Capricorn, trine Uranus. We might get insights perhaps on how to boost our own security, or we may become aware of a vulnerability. It might suddenly occur to us that something is not as secure as it should be, and we might want to take immediate action to sort the problem out. Now, as far as the heliocentric picture is concerned, I think it's always important to look at this, see what's happening over the weekend. When we put the sun, as it should be, at the centre of the solar system. And so this is the heliocentric picture. There is the Earth at 2 degrees 12 Capricorn. You can see that the Earth is starting to move towards a square with Mars. Now, it's going to take a bit of time before that square becomes exact, but I think we may be starting to feel it over the next few days. Just a sense of maybe growing agitation. Okay, it may not be our agitation. It may be a general agitation in society. People getting angry about things. Just the temperature going up. And I suppose that is to be expected. Maybe it all links with this full moon we've had at the beginning of a weekend. This full moon, people are just seeing things for the way they really are, and I suppose that could make people angry. So there is a bit of anger in the air, and that is something that perhaps we need to be aware of. But it's not exact right now, and we're only just starting to feel it. So what we will be doing over the next few days, when I look at the heliocentric picture, we'll be monitoring this square between Earth and Mars as it gets closer and closer. And that's it with the heliocentric picture, except I suppose I should point out that Mercury and Venus are making a semi-sextile. There is Venus at 1426 Cancer, heliocentrically that is, and Mercury is at 1450 Leo, heliocentrically. So if they're in semi-sextile, it perhaps means that, with Venus is a planet of relating. We want to relate. We want to be close to people. Yet Mercury isn't so sure. Mercury is perhaps wondering whether it's worth the effort, and perhaps might also be wondering whether it's going to get taken seriously. How much are we prepared to give away if we relate to other people, if we are with other people? Maybe we're going to be giving away too much. We're going to be giving away our independence. So that's one aspect of this Venus sextile Mercury. It might also be about the questions of appreciation. We may be feeling we're just not getting enough appreciation, and particularly if we allow our egos to get out of control. So it could be a little bit difficult, this Mercury Venus semi-sextile, but maybe it's a challenge we need to take up. We need to be able to communicate, Mercury, but we also need to be able to communicate in such a way that we don't put people off. So we've got to communicate with sensitivity. And at the same time, Venus is about relating, but we've also got to be able to relate in an intelligent way. Just relating for the sake of relating, without taking into account, why we're doing what we're doing, and not being able to explain ourselves. What are our motives? Always important to make it clear what our motives are, because if we don't tell people what our motives are, there's a danger that we will be mistrusted. Anyway, that's the Mercury-Venus semi-sextile. So I'm now going to look at the weekend from the view of the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for the weekend of June the 22nd and 23rd, 2024. Aries. It's a weekend where you feel that there are things that need to be done. And it may be, Aries, it's just like you feel that you've got your focus back. You may have felt a bit out of sorts recently, but now you're thinking, what's it all for? And you're going to want to see results. And I know it's a weekend and people like to relax over the weekend and perhaps enjoy themselves, but I think there are going to be limits to how much you want to, how much you're prepared to enjoy yourself. Because as far as you're concerned, there are things to be done, and you may be quite concerned about security issues. Is everything settled? Have you got enough money? Where are your vulnerabilities? And I'm thinking vulnerabilities, not necessarily emotional vulnerabilities. I don't know, is the security system in your home in working order? Should you have a security system? Those kind of ideas. I mean, it's not unique to you. It's not unique to Aries. Everyone is concerned about whether they should have security systems. I suppose it's for times we're living in. And this might mean that you are actually quite a difficult person to get on with this weekend. You're not your normal self. Happy-go-lucky, action, making things happen. It's not quite what it's about this weekend. You are perhaps more serious and more focused on your responsibilities, and I think that is good. It's nothing to be ashamed of, and it's a real sign that you're getting used to the fact that Mars is moving through Taurus, which is, Mars is your ruling planet. It's going through Taurus. Taurus is quite a slow but materialistic sign, and that says something about you. I mean, I know that if you're an Aries, materialism and money, they can be dirty words sometimes, but right now I think it's okay. It really is okay to think about the financial dimension, and you perhaps need to accept that not everyone is going to appreciate it if you're concerned about money and material issues. They might complain, and it might perhaps be the source of an argument. I mean, the moon is opposition Mercury, and so with moon opposition Mercury, people have strong words. People might resist what you stand for. They might resist your suggestions. But I do think, Aries, that it is a time when you need to hold firm, but at the same time also do listen to what other people are saying, because there is someone who's got actually very strong opinions which do need to be heard. Maybe it's a member of your family, and the reason I'm saying that is because Venus is on the Sun-Mercury midpoint. The Sun and Mercury are 10 degrees apart, and Venus is right in the middle, 5 degrees from the Sun, 5 degrees from Mercury. And so that Venus represents another person, as I said, possibly a member of your family, but someone who has got something to say but needs to be heard. And if it's not a member of your family, it just could be a close friend. It's probably someone you just see all the time, and in the recent past you maybe haven't bothered to listen to them, and now might be a good time to listen to them. See what they've got to say. You might not agree with what they're saying. You probably won't agree with what they're saying, but that doesn't mean that you should ignore them. Taurus, you really do have some powerful thoughts at the moment, and I think it's important, Taurus, that people do listen to you, because you have worked out quite a lot of things, and it's starting to make sense. And so if things are starting to make sense, it's possibly time that people need to know about it. You can't keep your thoughts to yourself forever, and you might have your doubts. Will people take you seriously? But they will take you seriously, and I think it's about the way you express yourself. It's not just about the words you're using, but it's about your emotional sensitivity. But just keep it simple and resist the temptation to get involved in complicated subjects, trying to bring in ideas to support your case, perhaps far-flung ideas, relating perhaps to philosophy or spirituality. No, just keep it simple. Just say what's on your mind, and I think in that case, people really are going to listen to you. And it's to do with the fact that Venus, which is your ruler, is on the Sun-Mercury midpoint. Sun-Mercury is about communicating who you are and what you want, and just make it easy for other people to understand what you're on about. Because once they do understand, I think it will be quite easy for them to just follow your lead, and I think that you'll be well satisfied with the results. Though, Taurus, I also do have to point out that there is a full moon this weekend. Okay, the full moon, of course, was right at the beginning of a weekend. In fact, depending on your time zone, it might have been late on Friday. But this full moon is about ideas, and it's about how you see the world. And I think perhaps recently you've maybe been too obsessed with certain facts and details. You thought that was the whole story. But now you're seeing a bigger picture. You're starting to see that things are more complicated and that there are different viewpoints that really can't be ignored. I mean, I know that you have expressed your viewpoints, and I think that's very important that you express your viewpoints. But what about other people's viewpoints? Viewpoints which, at first sight, don't make much sense, which seem to have no relevance to your own situation, but actually they do have relevance. And be particularly careful to listen to people who have a very different background from your own. You know, people who you don't normally meet. Maybe they're a lot older than you, a lot younger than you, or they come from a different culture or a different part of the world. Those are the kind of people you really need to listen to, because I really do think that they have got something very important to say. Gemini, you are feeling that money is important this weekend. I mean, it's really annoying that money is important this weekend, because you've got better things to do than worry about something as tedious as finances. It's just not really what you want to be worrying about. But I don't really think it can be avoided. There is this full moon. This full moon is hitting the finance axis of your chart, and if you spend any time on your finances, then it won't be long before you make some really very important realizations. That's what full moons are about. Full moons are about seeing the truth, and the full moon across the finance axis of your chart does reveal things, and it may not be pleasant, it may be disturbing, but truth, I think, is always better than ignorance. And I think as a Gemini, you really do understand that. And of course, I'm speaking as a Gemini. I do think it's important to understand what's going on. It might be more comfortable, to take the view that, how does it go? When ignorance is bliss, 'tis folly to be wise. I don't know. I don't really go with that. So do engage, and remember also that this weekend Mercury is square the North Node. So with Mercury square the North Node, it's all about information, perhaps information of a financial nature, as I've just been showing, having a bearing on how you see the way forward. You can perhaps see maybe financial differences between yourself and everyone around you. Stupid issues like who's got more money than who. I mean, it shouldn't be of any concern. And so sort of a challenge is perhaps to take money seriously, but at the same time not to be overwhelmed by money. Because I think money is the kind of thing where if you try to dismiss it, it starts to dominate your life. It needs to be taken seriously up to a point. And so perhaps you have to get the balance right. You can't be completely obsessed about money. But if you try to be totally unmaterialistic, you end up being obsessed about money anyway. So you kind of can't win unless you get the balance right. So I think that is something that it's important that you consider. And you must be ready, Gemini, to ask searching questions. Not just about money, but just about anything that is complicated. There are so many different things in life that are complicated. Whether it's politics, religion, emotion, trying to work out people's behaviour, and of course money, business, what governments are doing. Just do not take things at face value, Gemini. There's just no point. Though also, Gemini, there may be times this weekend when you are tempted to do something rather dramatic. You may feel that it's a time when you need to display some force. But you might be displaying force on the basis of a false assumption. Perhaps you haven't gone into a subject as deeply as you should have done. You've got just a bit of surface information. You think that's enough to justify what you're planning on doing. It's not enough to justify it. If you use force or you're aggressive just on a whim because maybe you're jumping to conclusions, I think that there may be cause for regret. So in that sense, Gemini, I think a bit of discipline could be very useful, and just consider the possibility that you are confused, and that if you are confused, then rather than act, you need to just gather some more information. Cancer. It's a full moon. Okay, the full moon was at the beginning of the weekend, but still, it's a full moon time. And Cancer, for you, full moons are always important. The moon is your ruler. You're sensitive to the lunation cycle. And, this particular full moon matters to you because it's across the main axis of your chart. The sun is in Cancer, your sign. The moon is in Capricorn, which is your opposite sign. And so you are super sensitive to what's going on. Now, as far as how this is going to manifest, I think that the sun is now in Cancer. It's at 2 degrees Cancer, and so you are feeling more comfortable. As it's your season, sun in Cancer, things are making sense to you. But the full moon shows you something else. It shows you the truth about perhaps a person or a relationship, and you start to understand its real underlying dynamic. And the truth can be difficult because the truth forces you to make changes, and you can't be happy with the way things are once you see the truth, because the truth is very rarely a comforting experience. There's always a little bit of disturbance with the truth. Relationships have to be changed in the light of what you can see. So be open to this. And when I say the truth or relationships changing, it's not just about seeing, for example, that someone is not a nice person or that someone is damaging you. It could be the other way around. It may be that you're dealing with someone that you had mistrusted, you'd misunderstood, and you're really starting to realize perhaps that this person could be a force for good. That can also be disturbing, even though it sounds positive. So just be open to the truth. And it might not be what you were expecting. And this is especially the case when dealing with relationships. And relationships, talking about relationships, the moon is making a sextile to Saturn. So this sextile to Saturn is more about Sunday rather than Saturday. And I do think that this sextile between the moon and Saturn could actually be very useful. We can see the moon as perhaps being you, Saturn being another person, the sextile as being a fortunate aspect. So when the moon is sextile Saturn, we might see you and someone else having a constructive interaction. It requires a little bit of effort. This is a sextile. It's not like a trine. Sextiles are, about the number 6, 2 times 3. 3 is about ease, but 2 is about conflict. So, what do you do when you put ease and conflict together? Well, it's dynamic. Bit of work, isn't it, is required. Not too much work, but just a little bit of work. And through that work, you and another person can start to understand your differences, but also understand how you can help each other. And in the process, you might need to show a little bit of humility, because it does seem that you're dealing with someone who maybe knows more than you. They might be better educated than you. They might have more up-to-date information than you. And they might have an experience of a particular subject that you simply don't have. I mean, this is not for certain, but just consider that possibility. So, in that sense, you have an opportunity to learn from someone, provided you give them a chance, provided you don't get too obsessed about power and your own ego. Just consider the possibility, Cancer, that there's someone out there who knows more than you. It's not about your ego, it's about benefiting from the situation. Leo. There's something a little bit hasty about this weekend. You want things to happen for some reason, and you're a little bit impatient. I mean, it's easy to be impatient if you're a Leo with all this stuff in Cancer. We've got, Sun, Mercury, Venus in Cancer. In particular, we've got the Sun in Cancer. And, the Sun is, of course, your ruler. And, you kind of want the Sun to be in Leo, in your own sign, but it's not in Leo. It's in Cancer, the sign before. So you have to understand the limitations of the time and not expect immediate action, but still you might be tempted to push things. And if you do push things, then that might cause problems. It might lead, for example, to misunderstandings, to accidents, to various avoidable mishaps. And really, Leo, you want to be in control, but you don't have to be making things happen all the time, like, right now. Rather, you need to take a step back and make sure that everything happens at the right time. And that is, I think, going to require a little bit of self-discipline. Perhaps also having a longer term perspective. Do you need everything to happen right now, today, tomorrow? Maybe you can wait a month. The Sun goes into Leo quite soon. I mean, okay, not right now, but towards the end of next month, Sun will be in Leo, and things are going to be, I think, in many respects, much easier for you. And I think you're going to get more attention, you're going to get more praise and support. And right now, it just might not be the time to get the recognition that you regard as being, really important. So, Leo, I would advise you this weekend to take it slowly and to, in particular, don't do anything dangerous. Particularly if you're feeling agitated. Because if you're feeling agitated and you do something dangerous or risky, then your agitation gets transferred into what you're doing, and then you can run into, real problems. For example, watch how you're going with if you're driving or operating machinery. Just consider your state of mind. I think that's always important. Consider your state of mind before doing anything potentially dangerous. And if your state of mind isn't right, then maybe you should postpone it. So, for example, if you're planning on taking a car trip, whether it's whether it's long or far, just ask yourself how you're feeling. And if you're annoyed about something, then maybe postpone it. I mean, it's just so easy for the way we feel to be transferred into what we do in the outside world. Just so easy, and just make sure that everything is properly organized, that everything is in order, and you'll get your moment. Don't worry. It's just that I think that this weekend needs a little bit of caution. Virgo. Mercury is, of course, your ruler, and Mercury is currently in Cancer, and at the same time, Mercury is square the nodal axis. So, with Mercury square the nodal axis, you might see it in terms of connections, because there is a view that the nodes are about connections. And if you take that view, then you'd say, well, now might be a time when you need to be connecting. There are connections to be made, especially as Mercury is in Cancer. And Cancer in the Virgoan chart is very sociable. So sociable Mercury, square the node, is about reaching out, connecting with people, even if there might be a certain amount of disharmony. People who you don't feel that you entirely get on with, people you maybe just don't fully understand. You might feel, well, no, this is not the kind of person I want to have around me because they're too complicated. Well, perhaps a challenge, Virgo, is to involve yourself with people who are complicated. Okay, not dangerously complicated. If someone is dangerously complicated, obviously you should stay away from them. But just because someone is complicated doesn't mean that you shouldn't get close to them. Because people that are complicated have got something to offer. They have an interesting view of the world, and that is really something for you to understand. And at the same time, in your social life, there is some danger that you overcomplicate things yourself. You might think that things are so complicated that you really can't discuss them. Perhaps taking a view that other people don't understand. They don't have your level of knowledge, so why bother explaining? Now, that approach is a bit arrogant, I would have said, and you should always make an effort to explain what you're doing. If something is, after all, worth explaining, if there's knowledge that's worth having, then surely it should be explainable. If it's not explainable, then what is the point of having a knowledge? I mean, that is one view. If you take a democratic view of knowledge, that knowledge should be freely available. And you should be a person who makes this knowledge freely available. And I do think that that's something you can do. It may be indeed that it is something you are obliged to do. With Mercury square the nodal axis, this may be a challenge that is very important to you. It's about a challenge that you need to get through to perhaps move on to the next level. I suppose if we see life as being about karmic snakes and ladders, we are trying to get to the end of the board, and here's a ladder. This is an opportunity for you to move further up quickly. But in order to climb that ladder, you have got to be open and you've got to perhaps see yourself as being something of an educator, as a person who can explain things using simple language, as someone who is not going to be arrogant. Because if you are arrogant and dismissive of other people, then in the game of life you could find yourself involved in a snake, and you could fall down the board. So focus on the ladders rather than the snakes as you progress through today's challenges, or the weekend's challenges. And do, if you really can, see yourself as an educator and regard knowledge as something that should be available for everyone, not just for Virgos. Libra. Venus is your ruler, and it continues to be on the Sun-Mercury midpoint. And I think I talked about this on Friday, but this configuration is still there. This conjunction between Sun, Venus and Mercury is, I think, of great benefit to you. And, with this midpoint aspect, I really think that you are able to express yourself extremely well. And I think that people are going to listen to you. And, it is the weekend, and I suppose it's a time when many people want to relax and do nothing. I don't think, Libra, that you are going to be entirely relaxed. And I mean that in a positive sense. You will understand that there are things to do and things that need to be explained. And there may also be a couple of people who you feel you need to be in touch with. Maybe for some material reason. Maybe you're thinking ahead. You might think, well, you need to get in touch with them now while you've got the opportunity. Maybe if you don't get in touch with them this weekend, maybe you'll miss your chance. So if that's the way you feel, that's fine. I think that you can probably trust your feelings on this matter. Though there is a full moon this weekend. Okay, the full moon was really at the beginning of a weekend, but I think we can still feel the impact of this full moon, and I think you, Libra, definitely can, because this full moon is across, one of the main axes of your chart. And perhaps the challenge here is to deal with people and places that you know very well, and I'm thinking particularly of your home and family. It's important to you, but at the same time it feels a little bit of a pain. Having to deal with family members is not always an easy task, and you might find that if you spend too much time with your family, they could take up a lot of your time and prevent you from doing other things that you want to do. You have these priorities this weekend. I think that you have priorities that may relate to the whole way in which you see your future progress, perhaps relating to career or business or status. You've got these priorities, and then you've got also to deal with family and people that know you well, and you feel, God, this is really not what you wanted, but it is something you have to go through, and I think you have to get the balance right. So perhaps for many Librans there may be a sort of home-work balance or a home-society balance. Getting a balance right is going to be important. It's not going to be easy, but that is the nature of this full moon. That is how it affects you, and this kind of full moon does happen. This is the Capricorn full moon. There's a full moon in 6 months' time, so it happens twice a year. You get this big home family challenge coming from a full moon, and now you've got to deal with it. I'm not saying that it's going to be difficult, but you do have to think about yourself and not be torn in two directions by forces that you don't have any real sympathy with. You've got to think about yourself, in other words. You've got to decide what is right for you and not spend ages thinking about what is right for other people. But, as I've said, Venus is on the Sun-Mercury conjunction. So, yeah, Venus is conjunct the Sun-Mercury midpoint. And because of this, I think you can explain yourself and explain what you want in a very clear way. And it may be that if you explain yourself adequately enough, you can sort of resolve a problem. People will sort of understand, it's like this. We understand your limits and we understand what you want. And in future, we're going to be more sympathetic. So it's just really important, Libra, that you're open and you're honest. Short term might feel easier to hide the truth, but if you do hide the truth, I don't think that you'll be doing yourself any favors. Now, as far as relationships are concerned, I understand relationships are always important, but today, or rather this weekend, you might find that some people are just a little bit slow and reserved, and they're not prepared to give away much. Okay, they might be quite happy to control you, to tell you what to do, but it seems to be a little bit of a one-way flow. And if this is the case, then you need to understand the situation as early as possible. And maybe there are just certain people who just aren't much fun to be with. And in that case, maybe you should just leave them to their own devices. Though it's also possible that you yourself might need to listen to some advice you don't fully want to hear, but nonetheless it could be advice which I think you could be able to benefit from. Scorpio, you are, I think, in the mood for telling people what's on your mind. You're not going to mince your words, but is it really necessary? I think there is a danger, Scorpio, that if you told people what you really thought, what was really on your mind, what really concerned you, that they might not respond very well. They might sort of say, oh, fine, okay, that's the way you feel, and that might be the end of it, but they might not really want to hear. And I think you need to accept that. So if it's not important, then it's probably not worth your while telling people what's on your mind, because I don't think people will be particularly interested. On the other hand, if it is important, and it sometimes really does matter, then Scorpio, you've got to tell it as it is. And if you tell it as it is, not mincing your words, being very, very clear, I think that people will actually understand. And you do have the opportunity, with the moon in Capricorn, to bring some people down to earth. There are some people who are not really paying attention to reality, and they don't really know what's going on, and they're not listening, but they can listen, and you are the kind of person that can make them listen. And I think it's because you're going to sound just really serious, as if you mean business. And you can actually turn the seriousness up. So I suppose seriousness is like a volume switch. You can decide, do you want to, if you keep your volume at 0, the seriousness volume, then okay, you're not going to be taken that seriously. But if you decide to make it 10, maximum intensity, yes, people are definitely going to listen to you. But by the same token, it's just important that you are prepared to listen as well, because there are people who've got some important things to say, and they might have ideas. Ideas always matter. It's easy to be dismissive about ideas, to think that ideas are a waste of time. Life is all about grim reality. Ideas is just a fantasy, but ideas have their place, and some people have some very good ideas which are actually prepared to share with you, and there is going to then be a communicative process, or at least there could be a communicative process, where someone shares an idea with you, you give them feedback, maybe you're not very comfortable with what you're hearing, but you don't want to dismiss it, and you tell another person what the problem with their ideas is, and it just goes round and round in a circle where there's sort of an increasing level of understanding, and maybe you and another person will reach some kind of compromise, and for your part, it might be a dynamic process by which you actually learn something, and which you even accept that you perhaps have got something wrong. And if you do find over the weekend that you decide that something is wrong and that you have got it wrong, I think you should be really pleased. You should be pleased with yourself for having the humility and good judgment to accept that you've made a mistake. Because once you've accepted that you've made a mistake, then you've got the possibility of fixing the mistake and being able to move on and to really start being successful, because success is often about recognizing mistakes from the past but building on the lessons learned. So Scorpio, if you're able to be honest with yourself and with the rest of the world, I think you'll be doing what is right. And I think that the weekend can actually be quite good for you. And I think certainly in terms of you learning things and developing, it really can be good. So I think you can really handle the challenge. Sagittarius, you are kind of a bit miffed by the full moon. It's not your kind of full moon. I mean, full moons can be exciting. I mean, people have whole videos about how wonderful full moons are on YouTube. Maybe they're videos that are specifically directed to Sagittarians and the wonders of a full moon. I don't think this full moon is actually particularly wonderful, at least from your perspective. And I think the problem about this full moon is it's focused on things that really you yourself don't really want to have to worry about. It's just a little bit too material, focused on things like money and organization and trying to get to grips with things. And yeah, you can understand in a theoretical sense that there are things you need to know, that there are things you got wrong, but in a practical sense, you'd really rather be doing something else. But reality is that there isn't a great deal to do this weekend. I mean, there is nothing in fire. Well, okay, there's Chiron in a fire sign. Chiron is in Aries. North Node is in Aries. But, that's it. And Sagittarius, you're a fire sign. You like some fire. It's motivating. And with this lack of fire, you just may feel that there's just a certain lack of motivation. But maybe it's just because you want everything to be exciting, and you just can't have everything exciting all the time. And I think, Sagittarius, just focus on the things that need to be done, making sure that things are properly organized. And if there's a financial issue or a complication or a detail that needs to be worked through, then I think it is important that you actually do that. Now, talking about fire, it is true, though, that the North Node is in Aries. Okay, the North Node is in Aries for a long time. But this North Node is giving you some hint about what you should be doing right now. And I do talk about this North Node every now and then and what it's about for Sagittarius. And of course, this North Node fundamentally is about you as the creator. That's what you are. You are supposed to be creating things. And yeah, the North Node is in a fire sign. It's not like a personal planet in a fire sign, but yeah, North Node is in a fire sign. And so it's kind of challenging you to be a creator and to find the fire that you need, but that fire is not immediately available. Or perhaps what that really means is that there's not a box of matches available. A box of matches is a really simple way to create fire, but all you've got is perhaps flint. You have to create energy perhaps in a more primitive, primal kind of way, and you have to rely more on your own resources. And if you can do that, you can start to find your inner fire. So where does this come from? Well, this weekend Mercury is square the North Node, and Mercury is in Cancer. And so that fire that you're looking for, you have to go deep in order to find it. Reality is that, if you think about the Earth, the deeper you go, the hotter it gets. As you dig down, I believe the temperature goes up, and if you dig down deeply enough, it's just molten lava or something. I don't know anything about geology, but we can perhaps think about that in terms of you asking yourself questions, going deeper down into yourself and into your unconscious, or I don't know, maybe that's a bit too grandiose talking about your unconscious, but just asking deep questions. You keep going, and then suddenly you reach a certain level where the temperature starts to go up, and at that point you have found your fire. And that's the Mercury square, the North Node. You've asked questions, and suddenly it's all connecting, and you perhaps realize that you don't actually need any spark from out there, because you've got your inner spark, and it's actually there, and you are actually alive and well, and you are actually able to make things happen. Capricorn. As you know, there is a full moon, or at least it's the aftermath of a full moon. And, with the full moon, you've got moon in Capricorn, sun in Cancer. They're opposition each other. And, by definition, that is a full moon. And this full moon is across the main axis of your chart. And I think it's very much about the balance between you and the rest of the world. None of us are alone, like it or not. Although, it's sometimes said we're born alone and we die alone, or I don't know, is it... I don't know, I suppose we die alone, don't we, in our own way? So in some ways we are alone. But this full moon is a reminder really that actually we are not alone. And you do have to consider what's happening on the outside and how things going on, how things happening in the outside world are impacting you. And yeah, you'd like them not to impact you, but the full moon is making you aware of how much independence you've actually got. So independence is generally considered to be a virtue, isn't it? I'm a very independent person. That sounds good. To say I'm completely dependent on everyone else doesn't sound so good. But independence does have its limits. And you are not entirely independent in the same way that no one is entirely independent. But with this full moon, you're starting to see how you are dependent on other people, how they are impacting you, and also how their actions are restricting your freedom. The knowledge is there. The question is then, what do you actually do with the knowledge? It may be just you accept the fact that people have their influence. That's the way it is. You can deal with it. Or you might just say, no, this is no good. You see the truth of the matter and you take action. And if that is the case, I think you can take very successful action. If you make your feelings clear, and particularly if you provide an alternative vision, that's really what matters. So, for example, if other people have control over you or appear to have control over you, it may be because they're able to articulate their ideas better. It makes sense. But if you can articulate your ideas better than they can, and if you can create a coherent vision about what you want and how you want the world to be organized, then you can start to claim your independence, because it just demonstrates that you've actually been able to think about it. Though, as I've said, independence does always have its limits, and you need to show a bit of understanding and respect to other people. I think there's at least one person who is quite attached to you, and you need to accept that. They might find you reassuring, or they might just like you, and they are just around. And perhaps they're in a slightly weak position, but you do need to, I think, to show some understanding. It won't go amiss. And it's possible that someone you underestimated can actually be very useful if you give them a chance. Maybe they actually have your best interests at heart, and up until very recently you hadn't recognized this. Maybe this weekend you will recognize that someone does have your best interests at heart, and that might be very useful in terms of a relationship developing. Aquarius, you are, I think, still in a state of mind where you're not entirely ready to give away much. You feel that, there are some things that are best kept to yourself. And, you feel that if you were to tell people what's on your mind, they just wouldn't appreciate it. Or you might just be giving away too much. So it's just best to say nothing. And I think that this full moon is going to force you to work out what you do with some of your thoughts. I mean, some of your thoughts have been sort of boiling away for a long time. And there's a question of where are they going? What are you doing with them? Now, maybe you'll take the view with this full moon will be making it clear that you have just been drifting around in fantasy and that you've just been going absolutely nowhere. That's one possibility. That sounds a bit negative. On the other hand, the full moon might be telling you, well, you've got these ideas, very interesting, but these ideas in themselves are meaningless unless you actually go and do something about them. And so, Aquarius, the challenge might then be to consider, well, okay, what are you going to do about these supposedly great ideas that you've got? And that might mean that you need to do some hard work, whatever that might be. So if you've got ideas, for example, to, I don't know, write a book, I mean, I'm not saying you should write a book or any other form of creative endeavor, you've actually got to sit down and write the words, haven't you? Or if you had some idea for making something, or planting something, or whatever you're interested in, you've actually got to do it. You've got to start to organize the creative process. And that is a challenge. And I think it has been a challenge over the last few days as the sun has, the sun moved from Gemini to Cancer. I think that was an important sign change for you. And with that sign change, it's not just the sun, because you had all these planets in in Gemini, which was a very creative place to be for you. But now they've moved, and they've moved into Cancer, it's more of a hard work sign, and it's telling you it's not enough to be creative. It's not enough to have wonderful ideas. You've actually got to go and do something. And I think that this full moon, which in a way dominates the weekend, is just forcing you to really work out how you're going to put theory into practice. Pisces. There is a full moon this weekend. Now, this weekend is strongly influenced by this full moon. I understand that the full moon was right at the beginning of the weekend, but still, it's not just something that happens for 1 second when that full moon is exact. You can feel the full moon as it becomes exact, and then it having hit exactitude, it has an after effect, or should we say an after shock. I don't know how shocking this full moon is, but this full moon is making you think about where you stand in the world. And there is the question of how much control you have, how much do you give away. I mean, it's tempting, Pisces, to just be, well, completely focused on yourself, and to think, well, maybe you don't really need anything else. You've got what you need. You don't have to go out of your way to change anything. And that's quite isolating. And it's also not very challenging. And the full moon is in many ways about a challenge. It's the challenge of seeing things for how they really are. For example, one type of challenge is putting yourself in a position where you could be criticized. Now, if you never say anything, You never do anything. You never produce anything. Or indeed, if whatever you do and whatever you produced is done in complete secrecy, if that were to be the case, you would never be criticized. Never. Because there would be nothing to criticize. But criticism is a dynamic process. And it might be a weekend where you need to take a few risks in terms of getting criticism, making something, creating something, and seeing what people say. Do they say, oh, this is garbage? And they don't usually, do they? I mean, that's, I suppose, a social media problem, that people will announce that they're doing something and everything says, oh, that's wonderful. Even if actually what they're doing is a complete disaster, is obviously a disaster. Negative comments not appreciated. I mean, that's a standard social media thing. You've just got to be completely supportive, whatever someone is planning on doing. Well, you don't want to walk into an echo chamber. That's tempting to walk into an echo chamber where you're just, your wonderfulness or your supposed wonderfulness is just fed back at you. You don't want that. I think what you really want is genuine feedback. And of course, genuine feedback can be hard to find. But the kind of people that can give you genuine feedback are, I suppose, close friends, perhaps, people you really trust, people who take you seriously. People who don't take you seriously will tell you you're wonderful whatever you do. You don't need that kind of those kind of people at the moment. You should really, in some ways, put yourself in a position where you can get criticism, because I think criticism can help move you along. And that is especially the case if you're engaged with something, something you're working on and you're just not entirely sure about it. Is it the right thing to be doing? Does it look good? Is it constructive? Whatever it is, getting the right feedback is going to be very important. And I do think that is something you should be working on. And I do think that the full moon is, full moon is about truth, as I keep saying, and it's about the truth of people just telling you the way it is. And of course, it's important that you are not offended, but I think you're ready for the truth. That is certainly the case. Pisceans are ready for the truth, whatever that truth might be. So those are my forecasts for the 12 signs, and I'm now going to look at the weekend from the perspective of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is the weekend going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And for the first hexagram I got was number 47, oppression. Now, that sounds a bit grim, but I wouldn't worry about it too much. So this hexagram does at first sight indicate that things aren't great. If you look at the symbolism of this hexagram, we see the top three lines represent a lake, and the bottom three lines represent a pit, the abyss. So we might get this image of a lake with a hole in it, and all the water is flooding out, and in the end, it's going to be dry and oppressed, and perhaps you might say that the joy has all gone out of it, and we just might feel that we just haven't got a great deal of energy as we move into the weekend, and it just might be difficult to get things done. And matters aren't helped by the fact that the bottom line is moving. And that bottom line indicates that, we're feeling quite sorry for ourselves. We're just wondering, what is the point? And the image we might have here is just being in a pit, just feeling that, we can't move. And I suppose the question is, how long are we going to stay in this position for? And I suppose that might be up to us. We can't get things done. We don't feel it's possible to get things done. And so negativity breeds negativity. Now, fortunately, that this line changes. So this bottom line moves from being broken to being unbroken. And in a way, that kind of fixes the hexagram. So if you think about it, what is the problem with this hexagram? Top 3 lines represent a lake. Bottom 3 lines represent a hole through the water is gushing out of. So if we fix that line and we make it unbroken, we get this hexagram. Now we've got lake on lake. So the hole has gone. So it does seem that at a certain stage we are able to get ourselves together. We feel sorry for ourselves up to a certain point, and then we decide to take action. Or it may be that circumstances beyond our control come in, and whatever the problem was, whatever was making us feel so negative, starts to fix itself. But there's still a problem somewhere along the line. So just because we're starting to feel that things are improving doesn't mean to say that we should think everything is fine, even though this is the Wilhelm translation of the I Ching. It describes it as the joyous. It kind of sounds happy, doesn't it? Moving from being miserable and feeling sorry for ourselves to being happy. I mean, that's the way it should be, isn't it? I mean, maybe if we take the first hexagram as being about Saturday, the second hexagram being about Sunday, Sunday we're starting to feel better. The oppression that we saw on Saturday just may have been about the full moon. The full moon was just showing us the truth, and we didn't like the truth, and we didn't like the way things were, and we were just generally feeling sorry for ourselves, but we got over it, and then we moved to the joyous. Now, the problem with the joyous is that it can be a little bit complacent, because we get the idea of being happy, saying everything is fine, perhaps having a party, meeting up with friends, pretending that everything is sorted out, but still things aren't entirely sorted out. And an alternative way of looking at this hexagram 58, is shown by Greg Winkup in his translation of the I Ching. He doesn't really talk about the joyous. He talks more about standing straight. We've got to be firm. And I suppose in the context of this, it's like saying, well, there's a lot of excitement. People are enjoying people are enjoying themselves. And it's so easy to get, wrapped up in it all, to go with the flow, this great sense of relief, after this original difficulty, everything's fine, but we must resist it. We can feel fine, we can be happy, but we need to resist the temptation to be overwhelmed by this feeling of happiness. Hence, I think, standing up straight, because if we stand up straight, the current doesn't knock us over. We are resisting the current, and we are able to do our duty and make sure that things are ticking over while perhaps there's a lot of chaos around us. And in the process of standing straight, and understanding what's going on, perhaps we can start to get to grips with what the original problem was, because the original hexagram was, about being oppressed, feeling we didn't have any energy left. And what was that all about? And so maybe by keeping our cool, by not getting caught up with the general merrymaking, we can start to do something useful, and we can fix the problem which was bothering us perhaps at the beginning of a weekend. But that does require some discipline, and also we have to be independent-minded. It's certainly not a weekend for following the crowd. Okay, time to consider American politics. So, where do I start? I suppose I have to start with Gavin Newsom, because people are talking about him. And it's this constant thing that he's going to be the candidate he's going to be the real candidate in November. That somehow it's all been planned, perhaps. And so I just wanted to consider that possibility. I'm not saying he's going to be the candidate. I must make it clear that I'm just reading what other people say, what other people think. So let's start off by looking at Gavin Newsom's horoscope. He's born in California. The great thing about Californian charts is they tend to have an accurate time of birth. And indeed, this is the case with Gavin Newsom. So here's Gavin Newsom's chart. October the 10th, 1967, 5:13 a.m. in San Francisco. And, the general view is that this is someone who really wants to be president, very ambitious. And I certainly think we get this idea from his chart that he is ambitious. He's got Pluto rising. People with Pluto rising can be very focused on themselves and what they want. And he's Sun in Libra. I know the Sun is weak in Libra, supposedly, because the Sun is exalted in Aries, therefore it's fallen in Aries. Sorry, it's exalted in Aries, therefore it's fallen in Libra. But many people, very successful politicians, have their Sun in Libra. David Cameron, he won elections, or whatever. I know David Cameron is not very popular in the UK at the moment, but he was a clever operator. He won 2 elections, and he had Sun in Libra. Margaret Thatcher had Sun in Libra. In Italy, I think Berlusconi had his Sun in Libra, and of course Vladimir Putin had Sun in Libra. So Librans can be very good at politics, and so with Gavin Newsom, his Sun in Libra probably helps him out. Of course, Sun in Libra does have its problems. It can be sort of rather too keen to compromise sometimes, but maybe that's the key with Libran politicians. You see, the way it works is like this, perhaps, for strong Librans, is that the standard thing with Libra is that supposedly Librans compromise. They look at what other people want and they just balance themselves. It's always a balancing act, always having to fit into what other people want. But maybe the really successful Libra does it the other way round. They have their view of the world and they want other people to balance to that view of the world. So, for example, Margaret Thatcher, she has an idea about the way things should be, and she imposed that vision on the UK. So that's an effective use of Libra, though you could argue that Libra is more of a problem for men rather than women. Margaret Thatcher, obviously a very successful woman, but it's it's a projectable planet. I think she had a moon in Leo, so maybe she was more moon in Leo than sun in Libra. But if you're a man, sun in Libra is unlikely to be projected. Anyway, he's got sun in Libra, and he's a successful politician. He's already governor of California, and apparently he wants more. And he's got Mars-Pluto square. So, we've just had this Mars-Pluto square, and we've got, so, there is an idea, a theory, that if you've got a Mars-Pluto square in your chart, you are going to be sensitive to the Mars-Pluto cycle. So I was just looking at the Vice President of Malawi, who has a Mars-Pluto square, and he just got killed in a plane crash at the time of a Mars-Pluto square. Now, Gavin Newsom is still alive and well, and so with this Mars-Pluto square for him, he was lucky enough not to be killed in a plane crash, but perhaps he is at the moment really been very ambitious, been focusing on his ambitions as Mars has been moving into Taurus, has been square Pluto in Aquarius. And it's an angular Mars-Pluto square, Pluto rising, Mars on the IC. So that really does indicate that there are things he wants, but is he going to get them? So as far as transits are concerned, we should not forget that at the end of this month, Saturn goes stationary at 19 degrees 26 minutes Pisces. So Saturn will be right on his descendant, 2 degrees off his ascendant, but it will also be square his Mars, and it will be opposition his Pluto. So that Saturn going stationary at 1926 Pisces. I know it's not exactly on his ascendant. It is pretty close to his midheaven, but it's hitting a number of sensitive points in his chart, and as it is going to stationary. And so I think that Saturn is going to make him quite frustrated. He might have his ambitions, but could Saturn stop him getting what he wants? I mean, I think that is a possibility. And then you've got to consider his various returns. So, I mean, looking at his solar return, so his solar return for last year, because he was born in October. So let's have a quick look at his solar return for last year. There we go. North Node on the ascendant. North Node I do regard as being quite benefic. It's kind of traditionally it's of the nature of Jupiter, and he's got Moon in Leo trine his ascendant, so he may feel that things are happening for him. So that is a possibility. But still, all this stuff on the descendant, I'm not convinced that it's all completely wonderful, because he's got the Sun on the descendant, he's got Mars pretty close to the descendant. There is opposition out there. But also notice about this solar return is that there's a Mars-Pluto square in his solar return. So here's someone who was born with a solar return. And I think that as a solar return is locked into his solar return, as a Mars-Saturn square is locked into his solar return for 2023, which runs from October 2023 to October 2024. I think we are perhaps seeing evidence here that at the moment, he is very ambitious, and maybe he does see an opportunity here if Biden were to falter. But I think it has to happen quick, doesn't it? it has to happen before the Democrat National Convention on August the 19th. Then we have his solar return for 2024. A sort of Mars-Pluto feel to it. I mean, it's not an exact Mars-Pluto opposition. I mean, it's 10 degrees apart, but still, we've got Mars rising. North Node on the 10th house cusp, Pluto on the 7th house cusp. You can see someone with continued ambition, an ambition that really should not be underestimated. And we can also look at his converse solar return for 2024 to give us a different picture. Now that's interesting because we've got the South Node on the ascendant. South Node is more of a nature of Saturn. That might be something reputational here, in a negative sense. So I don't think that converse solar return looks too good. Now the problem with all of this, and it's a standard problem with astrology, is that I look at all these transits and solar returns, and it's just data, information, and does it actually give us an answer? Now, in a situation like this, it can often be best to just ask a horary chart. Ask a horary question. Is he going to be president? Take the time we ask that chart, just set it up, and that's it. And we can answer it without having to look at loads of data about transits, returns, directions, progressions, just be overwhelmed by all this data. And sometimes a horary chart can give us a clear answer. I knew that Donald Trump was not going to win the 2020 election. I know some people say that whether or not you think it was stolen or whatever you think about that election, reality is he lost the 2020 election in the same way that Hillary lost the 2016 election. But for the 2020 election, I knew for sure, having done a horary, that Trump was going to lose in 2020. This election, I still have not got a good horary for the answer about what's going to happen. But I did ask a question last year about Gavin Newsom. So, me thinking about American politics, as one does, and I asked this question. Let me just tell you what the exact question I asked was. I asked the question, will Gavin Newsom be US president by February the 1st, 2025? So it's all rather convoluted, that question, but I wanted to cover all bases. So I thought this would be a good chart to answer this question with. And so I use the Regiomontanus house system because it was used by William Lilly in the 17th century. The ascendant is at 543 Capricorn. In fact, the ascendant is slightly earlier because this program has, I don't think its coordinates for Lakewood, Washington are entirely correct. I think they need to be adjusted a bit. But the ascendant, I think, is at around 4 degrees Capricorn. And so this was a chart for my question. And I do think it sort of fits, because though you have to consider who is Gavin Newsom in this chart. Where would I look for him? Well, firstly, who's me? I'm the person asking the question. So I'm Capricorn. I'm Saturn in Pisces. So Gavin Newsom, you could say that he's the 10th house because he's governor of California. That's one way of looking at him. So you could say, oh, he's Mars in Virgo. Alternatively, you could say, well, he is someone I don't know. I don't know him. He's just some person I'm asking a question about. So you could say instead that he is the 7th house. So is he the Mars or is he the Moon? I'm inclined to think that he's the Moon. And I'll tell you why. If I look at Gavin Newsom's natal chart, he has the Sun in at 16 Libra, with the South Node at 28 Libra. And so I'm inclined to think that actually he is the moon, because in that horary that I asked last year, the moon was in Libra, and the South Node was also in Libra. So my general view is that in this chart that Gavin Newsom is the moon. So if we want to try and answer this question, we would do it with reference to the moon. Now, we have to consider what the state of the moon is. The moon is peregrine. It has no dignity in that at 22 degrees Libra. It's not in its own sign. It's not in its exaltation. It's not in its triplicity. It's not in its face. It's not in its term. So intrinsically, the moon is quite weak. Further, it's in the Via Combustor. You can still get a result with the Via Combustor. So with from 15 Libra to 15 Scorpio, that is the Via Combustor. It's quite close to Spica. It's quite close to Arcturus. It may benefit a bit from its proximity to Spica, but on the other hand, it's moving towards that conjunction of the South Node. Now, it is moving also to a sextile of Mercury and a sextile of Venus. So you could say that those sextiles are useful, a good time for him to be shoring up his position. But is it good enough? I mean, to get to be president, you need a really good chart, a really good horary. And, I mean, by the way, in terms of my state of mind when I was asking this question, I was not feeling very sympathetic towards Gavin Newsom. I did not come into this question hoping that he was going to become president. That was not how I came into it. So if I'd really if I really thought he was wonderful and I really wanted him to be president, well, maybe you could have taken him as ruler of the first house from a sort of partisan perspective, but that was not what was going through my mind. So the moon, makes a sextile to Mercury, makes a sextile to Venus. Venus is conjunct Regulus, but it's going retrograde. My general view is not good enough. I'm not saying he'll never be president, but on the basis of this horary, I decided that I took the view, I used my judgment to say, no, Gavin Newsom will not be president between now, or when I asked the question in 2023, and February the 1st, 2025. Now, I didn't ask the question, will he be the Democrat nominee? So it doesn't exclude him being the Democrat nominee, but however he tries to get to be the president, or doesn't try to be the president, I don't think he's not. So all these issues about him wanting to go to the White House, he's not going to get. I don't believe that he's going to make it to the White House by February the 1st, 2025. I suspect that that's probably stating the obvious. I'm guessing that the chances of him, the bookies, the betting chances of him being getting to the White House are probably pretty remote, but I think that horary confirms it. Now, what I wanted to talk about was also, I want to talk about the Democrat National Convention, which is on August the 19th. I mean, I looked at the Republican National Convention, and just a reminder, here is a chart of the first day of the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee in Wisconsin. And this is the day of a Mars-Uranus conjunction. Now, by the way, I don't know when the Republican National Convention starts. I don't think they've given that information out yet. But on the day of that conjunction, of the Republican National Convention, there is a Mars-Uranus conjunction. And I think this is a dreadful thing, this Mars-Uranus conjunction. It's right on Donald Trump's midheaven. I think it's very important to note how Donald Trump deals with the Mars-Uranus conjunction on his midheaven. I think there are three. I don't know. I'm thinking there are maybe three moments for Trump to fail. I think the first moment was after his birthday. He's just had his birthday, because I think when you have a birthday, things change. If you're into perfections, the ruler of the year changes, the solar return changes, and so the energy is to change. So we might perhaps expect Donald Trump's fortunes to change. So far, I haven't noticed anything yet. The second point I'm looking at is the RNC convention, because I want to know how this Mars-Uranus conjunction is going to affect him. It's because that Mars-Uranus conjunction is close to his midheaven, and it's also exactly square his Mars. The third moment that I want to look at, assuming he gets through until then, is around September the 27th, when in his Vedic chart he moves into his Jupiter Mahadasha and his Venus Subdasha. His Venus is a bit weak. It's in his 12th house. Could be about his enemies. How does he respond in that last month, 5 weeks before the election? So there are three things that I'm sort of looking at in terms of wondering whether or not he's going to make it. But anyway, that was the Republican convention, which is on July the 15th. That does not look great. But what about the Democrat convention on August the 19th? Remember, this is when Biden and Kamala Harris are supposedly going to be anointed. Once they get anointed, I believe that's it. If Biden were to be incapacitated, then I think after that he'd be replaced by Kamala Harris. So maybe I've got that wrong. That's my understanding of it. So when we look at Biden, there are a number of signs that his presidency is going to turn out to be a disaster. And you might say, well, he's survived so far. I know the Democrats are saying how wonderful the economy is going. I don't know whether that's true or not. I think in terms of foreign affairs, he's certainly courting disaster. Some would say even he's courting nuclear war. And I always pointed out, I like to point out several charts that indicate the problems of Biden. One chart I like to use is the chart for his inauguration, January the 20th, 2021. This is a shocking chart. And I think it perhaps tells us about the Ukraine, perhaps other foreign adventures, potential foreign adventures. Mars conjunct Uranus. This is the Biden regime. Mars conjunct Uranus has almost certainly been involved in what was effectively a major act of terrorism when the Nord Stream pipeline was blown up. Remember the pipeline that brought Russian gas to Germany? It seems to be almost certainly the case that the Americans blew it up. So this seems to be an administration that is actually involved in acts of terrorism. So that's Mars conjunct Uranus, taking big risks. The Sun conjunct Saturn square Mars Uranus. So it's actually quite a shocking chart. It looks very dangerous. And another shocking chart was Joe Biden's last solar return. So looking at his last solar return, this was a real train wreck of a solar return. Again, we've got Mars opposition Uranus, and we've got the moon make it exactly on the midpoint. Uranus is pretty close to the midheaven. Mars is pretty close to the IC, and we've got the moon on the Mars-Uranus midpoint. So that was a second warning that something bad was going on with this administration, and particularly relating to the year from running through from November 2023 through to November 2024. But there are other charts, and we can look at Biden's chart and how it relates to the United States. But there is a chart, and I saw this chart, and I was completely shocked by this chart, and that is the chart for the beginning of the Democrat convention on August the 19th. So here's the chart. I don't know when it starts. Maybe it starts at 5 in the afternoon. So 5 in the afternoon, day of a full moon. Great. I mean, should you really have a convention on a day of a full moon? Is that such a good thing? And that does strike me as a little careless. I mean, didn't they consult an astrologer? Certainly, no one asked me whether it was a good time to have a Democrat national convention. And then look at Uranus. There's an exact Sun square Uranus, and so you got full moon square Uranus at the time of the national convention. I mean, that seems really careless. And then look at Mars and Saturn. Venus is opposition Saturn, and Mars is square Venus, and Mars is square Saturn. Venus is on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. That is really bad. The omens for this convention are terrible. Now let's look at the actual chart of the new moon preceding the convention, or indeed the new moon on the convention set for Chicago. There it is, 1:25 in the afternoon on that day, August the 19th. That's a chart of a full moon. Day of a full moon, we got 22 Scorpio rising. We've got Sun. There's our Sun opposition Moon, square Uranus on the descendant. It's bad, and so the question is, how is that going to work out? Now, you could say there could be events happening at the time of the convention. I mean, I suppose they could be events in the US, or they could be events outside. I mean, I suppose you could have pro-Palestinian demonstrators. They're spending something like, I don't know, I read somewhere they're spending $50 million on the security for this. Is that right? $50 million. So, I mean, I suppose it's reasonable to think there's not going to be any acts of terrorism at the time of this if they're spending so much money on the security for this convention. I mean, can't they just do it by Zoom? Wouldn't it save the money? Do they really need to all come together in Chicago? But apparently not anyway. So that's the convention. So how does this convention impact the various players? So looking at Gavin Newsom, so there's a Democratic National. So there's Gavin Newsom's chart in the middle, and there is the planets. But there's a convention here. What's going on for him? Well, over the next few weeks, Saturn is going to be very close to Gavin Newsom's descendant, and that's a reminder here that Saturn will be at 1727 Pisces on his descendant. So that's perhaps not great. Venus will be on close to his ascendant, though. I mean, I suppose that is a good time for perhaps presenting himself. But there is this Venus Mars Saturn T-square, which is at the time of the convention, is really hitting his chart. So he's got Mars on his midheaven. So Mars will be conjunct his midheaven at the beginning of the convention. Venus in Virgo will be on his ascendant, and Saturn will be linked there. And so he'll have, in fact, Mars will be opposition his Mars. Now, that's a little bit too dynamic. This indicates a man who is angry, to be honest. I suppose it could indicate a man who is really asserting himself for whatever reason. I mean, certainly trying very hard to get noticed. maybe trying too hard, and also perhaps angrily trying to assert himself, and perhaps taking things too far. But so that's Gavin Newsom and what's happening to him at the time of the convention. Now let's turn to Joe Biden. What kind of a convention is it for Joe Biden? It's his midheaven that matters, doesn't it? So this is in general a time for Joe Biden because he's got his IC at 19 degrees 54. So Saturn is going to go stationary at the end of this month at 19 degrees 26 Pisces. So Saturn is going to be pretty close to his IC, and so Venus is on his midheaven. I suppose Venus on the midheaven. I suppose that's making him making speeches, I suppose. But then Mars is square his midheaven. And there's this Mars-Saturn square. So, I don't know. That strikes me as being a little bit difficult too. We don't know what's going to happen to Joe Biden over the next couple of months. Remember that Mars-Saturn, that Uranus-Mars conjunction in July, it does hit his sun. So Uranus at the time of the convention is at 2711 Taurus, so that will be opposition his sun. So it seems to be a really high-pressure event, the Democratic National Convention. And then we can turn to Kamala Harris. Moon is on her midheaven at the starting point. Well, we don't know. The moon, sort of. The moon will have moved on. We don't know when this convention starts, so I wouldn't read too much into that. At the beginning of the convention, Mars is at 20 degrees 5 Gemini. So over the days of the convention, Mars will be getting closer to her ascendant, and Venus will be getting closer to the square of her ascendant. So I don't know. I don't think it's as dramatic for her as for Gavin Newsom or for Joe Biden. It starts, I suppose, on her Venus return. I suppose that's not so bad. I don't think it's such a big problem for Kamala Harris, this convention, but for Biden and Gavin Newsom, it does seem a little bit difficult. But I just wanted to talk to you about the chart of the Democrat National Convention on August the 19th, because it really does strike me as being a really bad day. Really bad few days. And when it just starts on this full moon, and just one wonders what is going to be going on August the 19th. It just could be also about global events happening at the same time as the convention. And one also has to wonder what the state of mind and state of health of Joe Biden will be by that convention, and what the Democratic Party is going to do about it. But I do think that even if Gavin Newsom, for some reason, becomes the Democrat candidate for the November elections, the HORI-IR would suggest that in that case, I don't think he'd win, whoever he was up against, whoever the Republican candidate, who I suppose would Trump. I suppose it would be Trump, then he would win. So I suppose if it is Trump versus Gavin Newsom for whatever reason, then one would expect Trump to win. But we don't know who. Trump is going to be up against. I assume it's going to be Biden. But a lot of people do think that it's going to be Gavin Newsom. I just don't think so. I don't think. My general feeling about Gavin Newsom is he's got a strong chart, but I'm not 100% convinced that this year is his year. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say about American politics. I hope you found that of some interest. If you like this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to indicate this by liking it. And if you're not subscribed, I'd be grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. So thank you very much for listening, and I will talk to you again very soon.